Good afternoon and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Supervising in Uncertain Times. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. It's a pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. My name is Shanta Bulai, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs we offer, the college's contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. And I'm delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Supervising in Uncertain Times. Feeling frustrated by the constant change and uncertainty in today's workplace? As a supervisor, you're the steady hand guiding your team through uncharted territory. However, keeping everyone motivated and focused when the future is unpredictable can be tough. Change and uncertainty are here to stay, but it is possible to keep your team moving forward even when the path ahead is unclear. This webinar equips you with practical strategies to lead with confidence during uncertain times. You'll learn how to strengthen your inner compass, a powerful tool that helps you gain perspective to rise above the daily grind and focus on what truly matters to your team and the organization. Trust your gut and make sound decisions by harnessing the power of self-awareness and known data. Connect with your team to understand their experiences, both wins and struggles, to build stronger relationships. And lastly, foster trust, transparency, and psychological safety through communication that keeps everyone motivated. It's a pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Stephanie McGovern. Stephanie applies skills and techniques honed over 20 years developing leaders, coaching, and helping create and maintain high-performing teams, among other duties, at leading manufacturing companies. She also has extensive experience in building employee ownership and commitment to organizational goals that will manage a department during times of rapid change. Stephanie, thanks so much for being with us today, and I will pass it over to you.
There we go. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Shanta, and really looking forward to talking about this very timely topic with you. So I want to start off kind of zooming out and getting a lay of the land of where we are. And zooming out and getting big picture also really helps, I think, with dealing with uncertainty. And then we're going to zoom in and give you some really concrete ideas of things to do. So I'm going to start off reading a poem. It's part of a poem, and the name of it's Clearing, and it's by a woman named Martha Postlewaite. She says, "Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue." And I think in our ever busy world, there's always something that needs doing, and we think we don't have time to pause. But the truth is, we don't have time not to pause. Pausing really helps us tap into our inner knowing. Gertrude Stein once said, we get so much information all day long that we lose our common sense. And I think this is part of connecting to that inner knowing. So the next hour is really meant to be a clearing in the dense forest and time to get perspective and listen for what yours is to do. So lest you fear we're going to spend our time in poetry land and not get to concrete, I just want to share a story with you. Went to a workshop many years back on power and influence, and the speaker said that 3-year-olds are the most powerful beings on earth. And for those of you that have been around a 3-year-old, you know this. And the reason he said it is because they have enough cognitive ability to keep coming at you with a different strategy, but they haven't learned how to be discouraged yet. And he said that is actually the key to finding and using your power, is keep looking for different strategies. So in our time together, my hope is you find just one thing that you could do more or less of that would really help you and your team navigate the uncertain landscape with more ease. One other thing I want to share, just as context, is there was a man named Herman Ebbinghaus that discovered something called the forgetting curve. And what he found out was that mental reinforcement, without mental reinforcement or some emotional connection, we lose at least half of what we've learned within a day. We retain only 10% after a week, and shortly after that, we remember nothing. It's we didn't even learn anything. So my hope is that rather than listening with your kind of half listening with your mind for ideas, which I think are a dime a dozen, you will really listen for what lands in your heart and body, because that is what leads us to action. So listening for what it is you need to empower yourself to be a better leader and to really do what you can to empower others in these times. So there's a quote from Stephen Covey. He says, if there's one thing that's certain in business, it's uncertainty. And I think we could just say that in terms of life in general. But it has an exponential effect. I think if you look over the last few years, every time you think it can't get more uncertain and more uncertain, it does. And we just take a brief look at the global situation. These are just a few things that came to mind. And if you take one of these things in isolation, it's enough uncertainty. But then you kind of put these all together, and we really have a lot of uncertainty to navigate, both personally and in our work life. And that's driving a lot of workplace changes. We've got a shifting job market where we've kind of got the great unbossing going on, where they call it, where we're trying to maybe reduce kind of levels of management, give people more autonomy, more creativity. I've seen this happen other times in my career, and it's easier said than done. But I think there's something we're trying to get at the heart of how do we really unleash creativity, which interestingly enough, one of the things we'll see is that uncertainty is one of the drivers that starts to unleash this creativity. Um, we've seen a lot of changes just around remote and hybrid. We've got some more cost-cutting efficiencies. We're trying to create more inclusive cultures where everybody feels like they have a place and they belong and they can really contribute. We've got AI out there kind of as a great unknown. We've got some restructuring things, lots of different things that we're all trying to navigate. So here's some impact on employees that people are experiencing. And I guess I'm just curious from your own experience. Let's do a poll here, which said, kind of which of the following effects of uncertainty have you seen, either personally or with direct reports? And feel free to choose as many as apply. Wow. Okay. Looks like burnout is leading the pack. Um, yeah, that's a lot of things going on. Um, I was doing a training class the other day, and I had people go into a breakout and share anything that was on their mind that might keep them from being present in the class. And when they came back, I said, "How was that?" And they said, "Wow, people have got a lot going on." And so we really do. And so how is it that we can kind of work with this? So thank you for answering that. Appreciate that. Um, so when the waves of change keep happening, it can really leave us feeling powerless. So we're going to explore this a bit. This is an interesting quote I came across. It was the Commissioner of Education for the state of New York. He lived from 1863 to 1940. And if you think of the amount of change he saw at the turn of the century at that time, it says maturity is the capacity to endure uncertainty. So in the next few minutes, hopefully we can learn how to grow up a little bit together. So I'm going to look at just some overview around stress and then how that can tap us into our power and courage. So this is sometimes it's called the circle of concern, sometimes it's called circle of influence. It's been around since about the 1990s. Stephen Covey, I believe, was the first person that came up with this. And the idea is that there's rings of our ability to focus. And one is focusing on things we can control. And the second one is things we can influence. We can't control them directly, But we can influence. We can influence our boss. We could influence peers, things like that. And then the last one are just things that are outside of our control. We just don't have any control over it. Now, what's interesting over the last 5 years with the pandemic and everything else that's happened is that circle of concern has gotten really large. And the feeling that I can control or influence has gotten smaller and shrunk. So we're going to look at how can we kind of widen that sense. So maybe you've heard of the phrase locus of control, and our internal locus of control is when we believe our actions largely determine our outcomes, that we can put our mind to something, we can move something forward and have a positive impact. When we are focused on external locus control, we believe that there's outside forces that are responsible for our, well-being, for our ability to achieve what we want. And again, over the last 5 years, we've seen a shift from internal locus of control to external. So let's talk about stress a little bit. So first of all, stress kind of gets a bad rap because we get overstressed. But stress in general is needed in order to grow, in order to learn, in order to be challenged. It's what helps us keep evolving as humans. But what happens is when we get overwhelmed with stress is we start believing that the external demands that are going on out there are greater than our internal resources. And that leads to anxiety. And at the core of anxiety, what creates anxiety is really overestimating the threat and underestimating our resources. So if you think of something that you're stressed about right now, is there any way in which you might be overestimating the threat of it? Or maybe it is a big threat. Maybe there is something that you really have to pay attention to, but are you underestimating your internal resources to some extent? Or the resources of support of people around you that you could draw on. Both of those help. So some factors that increase or that affect our internal locus of control are things like agency. Do we feel like we can make decisions that affect our life? Competency, do we have the skills and ability? Goal setting, to feel like we can set something and achieve it. Self-efficacy, which is kind of the confidence factor. And sometimes after something didn't go well, we kind of lose our self-efficacy a bit, and we lose that sense of confidence, even though we have good skills, we have ability, but we forget about it. And then the last one is the understanding, which I think has been a big factor lately of people not understanding things that are happening in their world. Let's do one more poll here to really bring this to light around understanding. So this is according to a PricewaterhouseCoopers survey, what percentage of people don't understand why the purpose of why change is taking place in their workplace? Okay, so it is actually 44%, so not quite as great as the 52%, which it may be different in your world. It may be even greater than 52% in your world. But if you think of that in general, that's 44% of people that don't know why things are happening. And when we don't know why things are happening, we fill in the blanks. And we usually fill it in with pretty negative stories and pretty negative scenarios. So people think, I've talked to a lot of senior leaders, and when I say, well, have you communicated the purpose? Oh yeah, we had that meeting, a while ago or whatever. And but the research shows that we need to hear messages, especially in times of change, at least 3 to 5 times to really understand and have it anchor. So I guess I'm just going to back up here a little bit. Maybe I'm not. Oops. So these factors. So what we're trying to do with increasing power is how can we increase this in ourselves and with the people that we're working with. All right. So navigating uncertainty requires a different kind of power. And we need both of these kinds of power. The old paradigm is about controlling events, situations, people to make things happen. And we need that. There's actually a part of our brain that needs control to create a sense of safety. However, what we also need is a new power paradigm that actually comes from accessing the higher level thinking parts of our brain in terms of neocortex and prefrontal lobes, which is about the power to meet uncertainty with acceptance, humility, creativity, and confidence. So we're going to explore that. So we're going to look at this from two lenses. We're going to look at how do you empower yourself first, kind of like the idea of putting your oxygen mask on first. And then we're going to look at how do you empower others. And some of these will have overlap. So my favorite power definition is from a man named Barry Oshry. He studied power dynamics in organizations for over 40 years. He says, power is the ability to act as if you can make happen whatever it is you want to make happen, knowing you cannot, and being willing to work with whatever does happen. And I love this definition because it's a realistic definition. Most of us think that, powerful people just have this idea and they go for it and they make it happen and everything works out. Not so. This is a quote from a dear colleague of mine. He says, the powerful are not powerful because they never feel powerless, but because of what they do when they feel powerless. And so it's the idea, if you've ever seen a movie where kind of the arc of the story and the star of the program is all of a sudden everything looks lost and desolate and you don't know how that things are going to turn out. And then there's this moment of despair, and then something arises within them, a sense of courage, perspective, creativity, something that starts to turn the situation around. So we all feel powerless and sometimes people feel like if they feel powerless, it means they're an imposter. Like I shouldn't be in this role because I'm an imposter because I'm not sure what to do here. That's normal. That's human. But the question is, what do we do in that moment of powerlessness, and how do we access a different part of us that can help us? So the first piece here is I call it accepting what is. And it comes from the paradoxical theory of change, kind of a fancy name from Gestalt therapy. And it basically says you can only change by first accepting what is. And sometimes we believe that if we accept what is, it means we're giving up, we're surrendering. But really, it is actually the source of a lot of power to really accept what is going on. So I'll tell you a story. This is when I first was starting my career. I worked in an organizational development department. We worked with a lot of organizational change, and we were going through a really tough time, lots of layoffs, lots of cost cutting, and we got a new HR VP. And so I had a one-on-one with this new VP, and I made a list of all these issues that were going on that needed change. And I was going to go talk to our new VP about that. And I first ran it by my boss, and I said to my boss, so here's what I'm going to tell John. What do you think he's going to say? And my boss looked at me and he says, well, I think he'll say, Stephanie sounds like she's unhappy and she needs to find a new job. And then he looked at me and he said, Stephanie, you act as if this organization should be set up just to make you happy. And it was not expecting that, but it was quite a wake-up call that I have thought about through my whole career is, what am I doing to actually first accept what is and then add value to make it better? And so I actually was in a yoga class yesterday, and I was there's some music that came on, and I thought, what is this music doing in a yoga class? And I was really resisting it. And we were in a balancing pose, and all of a sudden totally lost my balance. And then I thought, oh yeah, accept what is, and brought myself back, and I got to regain my balance. So when we tense against reality, we lose our balance and it drains our energy. And then we don't have resources that are available to really work the situation and make it better. So if you think anytime you think, well, I wish this or I wish that, sometimes I wish my boss would give me more direction. I wish I would get more feedback. I wish this. It's like, first of all, accepting, well, this is what it is right now. Okay, this is it. Now, what can I do about it? So this is a quote by Eckhart Tolle. Some of you may have heard of him. Says, if uncertainty is unacceptable to you, it turns into fear. So just that resisting of uncertainty makes it worse. If it's perfectly acceptable, it turns into increased aliveness, alertness, and creativity. And if you think of the uncertainty that happened during the pandemic and all the creative work options that came out of that, and I really believe we're in a time of creativity that we need to really address a lot of the things that are happening. The second one here is balancing realism and optimism. So we tend to have a focus on one or the other, just our orientation, our personality. And if we get too heavy on one, it creates problems. So realists often think that optimists are kind of pie in the sky and maybe accuse them of toxic positivity from time to time, which may be true. And optimists also sometimes think, realists are stick in the mud, and we have this tension and this fight between it versus saying, how can we look reality square in the eye and say, this is what is right now? And with full possibility and creativity, say, okay, now what do we do? And often there's emotional process we have to go through to look at reality because we have a very strong denial mechanism, and so there's an emotional bit that we have to do that sometimes then can lead us into that optimism. But trying to balance that within yourself and say, where am I? Am I too heavy on one? And do I need to rebalance somehow? And then the third one is finding curiosity and courage. So curiosity is interesting. It actually gives it the moment we change from maybe resisting something to looking at it from a curious, like, isn't that fascinating place? I didn't expect that to happen. There is something that happens in our brain, and there's a dopamine release, which is that, kind of feel good hormone. And our brain actually, part of our brain that helps us with memory and learning starts to activate. And we're better able to absorb things and, work with that. So that part about having the courage to not know, to be comfortable with, gosh, I don't know, but I am going to stay open and find out. There's a quote by Mark Twain. He says, it ain't what you know, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And, we're trained to think that smart people know stuff, but some of the smartest people are smart because they allow themselves not to know stuff. They allow they allow themselves to be curious about that. How can I learn more about that? Yes, I might know this, but I don't know anything about this. And how can I find out information about that? Um, so this one is affirming your strengths and purpose. So those of you that have seen the movie Matrix get this visual. This is Neo from the Matrix, and he was, kind of the star of the show, and he was chosen to save humanity from the machines. But he did not want the responsibility, and he kept, thinking, no, not me, not me. And finally, at some critical point in the movie, you hear that, no, Neo, you are the one. And I have seen this so often in managers that I have coached where they're trying to be someone like somebody that was a good manager. They're trying to be like somebody they knew that they thought was a good manager, or somebody that was in the role before them, um, versus being who they are and really bringing their strengths and what they were meant to do. And I think that I always like to remind managers, you were hired for a reason. That you were chosen over other people that were available for the job. And that was because the organization, your team needed your specific strengths at this moment. And then affirm your purpose. Like, what is it that you know is a way you add value? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But that sense of purpose gives us courage, gives us persistence in the face of difficulties. And then lastly, just accept you may be the one, but you are human. You are a human being. You have limitations. Sometimes you need to set boundaries. Sometimes you need to say no. I always like to say, learn to say no in a way that feels as good as a yes. Yes, you need to set boundaries, but in a way that maintains the relationship. But there's just, sometimes you just can't do it all, and being able to negotiate that and kind of work with that. The next one here, you may be the one, but you are not alone, and you can't do it alone. And so what are you doing to build your support network? How are you bringing in diverse points of view and different perspectives? You think of the best presidents that we've had, and some of the research shows that one of the things they have done is surrounded themselves with people with very different backgrounds and very different perspectives. And it's tempting to want to surround us by people that want to just say, oh yeah, you're doing fine, you're doing fine. And we need that. We need people to reinforce that. But we also need people to challenge us. We also need people. I have somebody that I have worked with a lot, and I'll share something, and all of a sudden he'll say, Stephanie, I think it's just the opposite. And I love that. I love that ability to really look at things in a different light, a different perspective. And the truth of it is that to be a good leader, we're always managing polarities. And a polarity, like realism and optimism, is a polarity. We need both. We can't just do realism. We can't just do optimism. We have to do both. And to be a good leader, it's a lot about managing polarities. And so you need to build a support network that really helps you see the parts that you can't see, and helps challenge you, and also helps affirm your strengths, because it's way easier for other people to see our strengths than we do. We tend to get down on ourselves, and we think our strengths are no big deal, because they come naturally to us, so we discount them. So building that support network that can both support and challenge you is critical. The last one here, in terms of your empowering yourself, is the concept looking at adding value versus completing tasks. So adding value is a kind of a simple concept, about trying to improve something, trying to make something better. And if you think of it, kind of at the highest level, leadership is all about adding value. And when we add value, it taps us into our sense of purpose. It gives us motivation, also gives us job security. The more we're thinking about adding value, and I'm just going to give you a simple example. So think about an email that you've just received from somebody, you received the email and you thought, what do they want me to do? Why am I even receiving this email? What do they want? And it was very frustrating. And then you kind of got irritated because you even took time to read it and you didn't understand what was going on. So taking time to add value to an email might take you maybe an extra 15 minutes. But if you think about it in terms of what am I doing to make someone else's life easier on the other end, in terms of providing context and background, why are they getting this? What's the action requested? What is it that I want, specifically, by what time? Why are they getting this email? And then, reinforcing, thanking them, so that you're doing things from a lens of other people, not from your lens. This one of my the same boss that I talked to you before about the talking to the HR VP. One day I was frustrated by somebody, something happened, and he drew a big circle on the whiteboard and he said, Stephanie, here's the universe. And then he put a dot in the middle. He said, here's the center of the universe. And then he pointed at the dot and he said, you are not here. And it was very helpful for me in terms of that lens of customer. What am I doing in terms of adding value to someone else? And there are times where I've been really busy trying to get stuff done, churn something out, and somebody calls and they need something. And by just taking a little extra time and being of service, it gives me a whole renewed sense of energy. Where I thought before it's taking time away from my to-do list, it actually is a renewing source of energy because it feels like I added value somehow. So some questions that help in terms of adding value. I'm just let you read some of those. A couple I just want to call out is what context is missing. I think oftentimes we assume people have the same context, we have the same background, and we don't spend time giving people context and bringing them along with us. The last one here, the last question I like is, what's missing that if it were present? So it could be things like data, information. It could be compassion. We need to have compassion. I need to have compassion for myself. I need to have compassion for other people involved. Maybe it's courage. Maybe what's missing right now is courage to really stand up and say something hard and speak truth to power in a productive way. So, what is missing that if it were present would help is a way of starting to figure out how can we really move things in a more productive way. So let's do our another poll here. So all of those 6 things we just talked about, what is something you want to focus on to empower yourself? So you may be doing some of these things already, but what's something you'd like to do a little more of? Wow, it's a lot on focusing on adding value. Um, I'll just say a little bit more about that one. It's interesting that completing tasks does give us a dopamine hit, and that's why we like to check it off and like to do. But I think of a quote from Henry David Thoreau. He says, it's not enough just to be busy, so are the ants. What are you busy about? And I do think that focus on adding value taps it into something deeper in us, our sense of purpose, our sense of really wanting to make a contribution. It gives us a sense of meaning. Um, and so all good things to focus on. And these are all things that you can actually help your employees with in addition to some of the things we're going to talk about in a minute. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so now we're going to move into empowering others. And I want you to look at this list. If we looked at this list just from a kind of a head place, and yeah, all these sound like good things. Um, but what I want you to listen for again is what is it that resonates really with you, given your unique situation right now, that will make a difference, that will add value to your team. All right, so first one here, communicate authentically and often. So this is hard sometimes because sometimes we think, well, I shouldn't communicate authentically because I'm really frustrated right now and I know I shouldn't share that with my team, which is true. You shouldn't just vent on your team. However, there's ways of communicating, especially like if you're frustrated with a change or something that's coming down. I worked with somebody once, Harry Woodward, he wrote a book called Navigating Change. And he had a really simple process for communicating kind of difficult things authentically. And the first thing was just kind of what is the change that's happening? The second was, here's what I think is good about this. So the benefits, the purpose, positive intention. Here's what I'm concerned about. So it's okay as a supervisor to share concerns. It's like as long as it's balanced. Um, and then here's what I think we've got control over. Here's what I think we can focus on. How does that land with you? And then you get people involved in having a discussion as well. But I think there's a way of being honest. And the other thing I would say is communicating often. Um, again, our brains are, we don't like missing information. And it just naturally fills in. I mean, in fact, they'll show you optical illusions where your brain fills in information that's not there because it doesn't like to not make sense of things. So when we don't, I remember when I first started managing, I was in a staff meeting and somebody was talking about something and they were upset about something. And I said, well, yeah, but don't you know, blah, 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 blah. And I realized that they didn't know that I had gotten that information in another staff meeting and I hadn't shared it with them. And they didn't know that. And so I think sometimes we forget that people need, more often frequent communication. Um, give people a voice and choice. So this doesn't mean they always get a voice and choice. But the research is very clear that when people have a voice and choice, they're more committed. So be strategic about where they can have a voice and choice. Here are the givens. These are not negotiable, but here's where we do have some choice. Balance the unknown with the known. So be honest about what we don't know and focus on what we do know. This is a mistake I think a lot of people make with navigating change is they start talking all about the change, but they forget to say, but here's what's not changing, and being able to provide people kind of that stable ground. Short-term goals and celebrate progress. This is a universal motivator, a sense of progress. And part of the thing that creates burnout and change fatigue is we see no sense of progress. And even if you've got, kind of mixed priorities from upper management, the strategy isn't clear, you can celebrate progress about how you work together as a team. So maybe the what's not clear, but you can celebrate the how piece. Find ways to set short-term goals and celebrate, no matter what, whatever is in that sphere of control. Recognize and appreciate people have an innate human need to be seen. To just see, I see you put in extra effort. I see you did this, or I just see you, not about what you did. It's just, I see you as a person, and those touch points that we have, which often seem difficult when we've got so much to do, but it creates a sustainable energy, I think, both for ourselves and other people. It taps a natural inherent motivation, which creates more energy. Provide context and connect the dots. So this is a huge one. We've talked about this a little bit. Keep reminding people of context and connecting the dots. I have somebody that I work with that oftentimes we find ourselves reminding, oh, remember last month we didn't even know this, and now we've made progress here and here and here. Or this was going on, and it's amazing that we actually got to where we are given what was happening last month. So helping people connect the dots in terms of where the progress is being made. And acknowledging, yes, there have been frustrations. There have been things that have been roadblocked. We have been stalled out in things. But how can we then say, but what is it that we did that did help and make a difference? Prioritize, be the reality check. So this is actually from the work of Barry Oshry, the person I told you about that had studied power. And it's like being caught in the middle between upper management, peers, employees. Often supervisors are really meant to be a reality check for upper management of saying, I know you're asking for this change, but you need to understand what's going on at this level. And to be a reality check that's not just, no, that's not possible. We can't possibly do that. It's, it will overwhelm people, but saying, here's the lay of the land. Here's what's really happening. I understand this needs to happen. Let's talk about the best way to pace this to make this happen. That's a way of being a reality check, and it takes some risk. Um, it's easy sometimes for upper management to blow things off, thinking it's just noise. Yeah, people will just suck it up and go on and get things done. But sometimes we have to really be adamant about, yeah, maybe in other times, yes. But this is, I want to give you perspective here in terms of what's really happening. And then investing in employee development, whether it's just coaching, like, daily coaching or, something, or if it's more formal in terms of training, it gives people a sense of control. It gives people a sense of their own fate, and that sense of agency. And then empower through coaching. Sometimes we think in coaching, in some organizations, it's coaching we only do when there's a problem. But coaching is a process that we can use to empower people in daily conversations. And I'm just going to give you a really short coaching process that I think helps people navigate uncertainty. So somebody comes to you, they've got a problem, they got something going on, and you say, what's happening? You let them tell their story, you use some good active listening, and then you ask the question, what do you know for sure? Because embedded in a lot of people's stories about what's happening are assumptions, he said, she said, they said, all those different ways that we navigate things and put pieces together. So what do you know for sure? What outcome would you like? It's very easy for people to get focused on what they don't want. But what is it they do want? And the fourth question is putting that back in that kind of sphere of control is, what could you do to make this situation better? Yes, there might be some things out of your control, but what could you do? And if you have ever followed the work of Cy Wakeman, this is kind of one of her questions. She asked, "What would great look like?" And it's kind of that sense, if you were great right now, if you really accessed, the most powerful, creative, courageous part or creative part of you, what would you do? And how, what could you do to make it better? And then remember, you're not alone. Who else could help you? And whether it's you, the supervisor, or another peer, or somebody else from another department. And then what's your next step, in terms of making it concrete? So let's do our last poll here is, what's something you want to do to empower others? Wow. Oh, look at that. So we've got communicate and appreciate. Yeah, and all of these in some ways are just very simple things that can make a difference. And I always, when I'm coaching people, I'm always looking, what's the small thing that can make a big difference? Because we can't change, lots of things all at once. So, so thank you for sharing that. So I just want to close I got 3 quotes. I'm kind of a sucker for quotes. So the future is uncertain, but this uncertainty is at the very heart of human creativity. And I really think it calls to the best in us to meet the uncertainty and how we can navigate it in creative ways. Another one here, it says, I am only one. Maybe many of you have heard this, but I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I will not let what I cannot do interfere with what I can do. And then the last one here is Margaret Wheatley, and I came across her at the very beginning of my career, and she was a scientist who studied chaos theory. And then she went into organizational development and change because she saw threads of chaos theory with working with organizations, which is an interesting parallel there. But she has worked a lot with leaders in our kind of trying times. And she says, who do you choose to be for this time? Are you willing to use whatever power and influence you have to create islands of sanity? I love that. Islands of sanity that evoke and rely on our best human qualities to create, produce, and persevere. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for presenting today. And it's so funny that you ended on quotes because I was just going to make a shout out. I really enjoy your quotes a lot. I'm currently enrolled in the Organizational Development Certificate, which Stephanie instructs. So if you enjoy the quotes as much as I do, I would definitely suggest checking that out. So I will move on now to our Q&A portion. But before we do that, we just have a quick poll here regarding our presentation and our production in general. So if you could just take a minute or two to answer these two poll questions. And also if you have time, please scan the QR code, and that's a little bit more in-depth survey if you have any ideas of topics that you want to see for CCAPs to present. So I'll just give you a minute to fill those out and take a look at that survey as well. And if folks have questions, also please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A, and I will get those over to Stephanie. And if I don't get to your questions today, you can pass them along to ccapsinfo@umin.edu, and we can pass those directly to Stephanie, and then she can go ahead and answer those for you if they're a little bit more in-depth questions. All right, so we will move on to our Q&A now. And our first question for you here, Stephanie, is how do you start the conversation with the organization to implement a lot of these strategies when they are a just do it mentality?
Well, I think first of is looking for opportunities for you personally to live it. So let's just take the principle of accepting what is. It's like, first of all, they've got to accept that you do have a do it culture. It's like and there's strengths around that. So there's an acceptance piece, and then there is. I always look when I'm trying to influence people of saying, I think of the Dr. Phil question, how's that working for you? And looking at what are the downsides of the do it culture? What are the downsides that leaders may be experiencing of the do it culture? Maybe it's turnover, of key people, maybe it's other, productivity measures of with people burning out or something. And looking for what are those kind of downsides. In order for change to happen, people need to have some sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo. So being aware of that and then creating a vision of what's possible, what's in it for them if they start implementing some of these. And I think the key thing I would just say is, I think if you start with yourself, what I believe is that your inner knowing will start to kick in about how to influence in the moment. And it's more of sometimes a one-by-one person where you start getting allies and people who get it. So I think it's like kind of like start with yourself.
Awesome, thank you for that. And our next question is about the book or author you shared earlier about managing change. Can you reshare the name?
Oh, Harry Woodward, and it was written in the 90s. And it's one of my favorite books on change. It's called Navigating Change because it's so practical. It's such a practical, visceral way of thinking of change.
Awesome. And our next question is, how do you recommend approaching a situation where you and your supervisee both have to deal with challenging team dynamics among other team members? How to address and acknowledge this as a supervisor?
Hmm. So first, if someone came to me as a supervisor and somebody was saying that there were dynamics on the team that were difficult, first of all, I would really want to know about that person's experience. How is that affecting you? What's happening for you? Um, and connect with that person before I'm starting to get into a bigger, whole conversation about the team. and validating that person's feelings, emotions, whatever is happening. And then soliciting ideas from the person, in terms of what do you think would help? Here's some different things, I think might help. And I think, being able to be honest, with each other about what they think would work or don't work. Sometimes supervisors, in an attempt to be helpful, they kind of charge in trying to make things better and they make things worse. So really listening to what the underlying concern is. And then also giving the person perspective in terms of what's happening with the larger team sometimes. It helps balance, some of their concerns. So it's a tricky one, but I think that being able to ask and work with the person around how do we bring this to the larger team in a way that's constructive, and so that there's a partnership in developing a strategy there.
Awesome. Thank you for that advice. And our next question is regarding change management uncertainty. I've heard the advice to work with the willing first. What's your take on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think you want to work with the willing and the people that are neutral. There's a whole population of people that are just neutral. They haven't made up their mind one way or another. And so they are the easiest to to sway. You first start with the willing and then look at that kind of neutral population and what is it they need to be tipped into be more of ambassadors and that more willingness. And then I do think that you do need to work with resistors. And I could spend a whole day with the whole thing talking about how to deal with resistance. But I think it's working with people in a way that you're not resisting their resistance and you are curious about, because sometimes resistors have great ideas and they just haven't been listened to. And then there are active, those that are actively disengaged or sabotaging. And those you do need to take a firm hand with of saying, this is not okay.
I like that because kind of bring in the alternative perspective from both sides. And our next question is, what do you recommend for a fixer fix-it personality? Someone whose comfort zone is to try and fix things when this can be intrusive to others.
Oh my gosh, you got to come to class for that one. Um, I think, first of all, realizing that I actually have a piece of this in me, but I really realizing the negative effect of trying to fix somebody. I mean, anytime I try to fix somebody, I'm basically saying there's something wrong with you. And what a message, to give to somebody, and really believing in the best of people, that they actually have answers within themselves, that if I can create a safe place, I can listen, I can ask good questions, they're going to come up with answers for themselves that are much more likely to be implemented and sustained in the long run.
Great. Thank you so much for answering those. So if I didn't get to some of your questions, please email them again to ccapsinfo@newman.edu, and we will pass those along to Stephanie. So if I can have you go to our next slide here.
Nope, that's it. I don't have it.
Okay. No worries. So CCAPS now offers flexible workplace development solutions designed to equip employees with the targeted knowledge and skills your organization needs. Our programs include industry-driven bachelor's and master's programs, along with 12 non-credit certificates and over 80 individual classes. If you or someone in your organization would like to learn more, please schedule a consultation with our business development representative, Beth Laurie, and there is a QR code if you wish to reach out to her as well as her contact information. And next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, we would send a link to the webinar recording with a Within a week of today's webinar, the recording will also be posted to our CCAPS webinar archive, as well as our CCAPS YouTube page. University of Minnesota employees are now eligible to receive well-being points for listening to our webinars. So please view the link on the form and go ahead and fill in your information. That will also be provided on our CCAPS webpage too and our webinar archive if you can't find that link. And the college's contact information is here as well. So thank you so much all for joining us today. Thank you again, Stephanie, and you all have a wonderful afternoon.